The moon hung low that night, casting silver beams across a sprawling expanse of farmland, quiet as the grave. But a storm was brewing, a tension thicker than the humid air. A rustle in the cornfields broke the eerie stillness. Shadows moved furtively amongst the cornstalks, too large to be mere animals, too quiet to be ordinary farmers. They were men on a mission, cloaked in darkness, armed, not with plows and shovels, but with intentions as sharp as the knives at their sides. 3 of them crept closer to the old farmhouse, eyes glinting with greed and mischief. "Easy," the leader whispered, his voice exaggerated low, as if daring the night to challenge him. They believed this place was abandoned, a relic of a time long forgotten, its owner nothing but a frail, forgotten soul. But they couldn't have been more wrong. Far from the crooked porch, hidden within the shadows, an old man stood watching, unyielding. His hands, calloused with age, gripped a weathered cane like it was an extension of his very being. Back in the day, this man had walked with the power of thunder at his feet, a formidable commander whose mere presence silenced tyrants and inspired loyalty. And tonight, those men had crossed a line they couldn't comprehend. The leader of the intruders whispered again. "We'll grab what we can, split, and be back before anyone notices," he said, the allure of easy money thick in his voice. The others nodded, their greed palpable. They didn't know that this was not just some rundown farmhouse, long dismissed by the world. This land had history, his family had fought for it, bled for it. Underneath its paint-peeling facade lay stories etched in courage and sacrifice. This was a sanctuary. Their whispers fell like stones into deep waters, stirring currents that had lain still for decades. The old man held his breath as he watched them shuffle closer. They thought they were invincible, masked by shadows. They had no idea who they were dealing with. He reached beneath his worn jacket, fingers brushing over a small, cold metal object that brought him calm. It had been years since he had taken it out of its resting place, long since his days of conflict had been laid to rest. But tonight felt different. Tonight he was no longer just the caretaker of a forgotten farm. He was the storm rising to meet the intruders. Across the overgrown yard, one of the men, shorter but brimming with bravado, kicked a rock. It skipped across the worn porch, thudding against the rotting wood. He laughed, a crude sound in the still air. "Old man won't know what hit him," he said, waving his knife around like a toy, emboldened by the thrill of their mission. They were just moments away from crossing into the unknown. Came the little voice of doubt from one of the other men. The shadows were shifting, moving like a living entity. The leader cut his friend off with a hiss. They simply had to focus, tell themselves they were in control, even as a light flickered in the porch's dusty window, a faint glimmer fractured by time but burning with resilience. The old man stepped forward, letting the moonlight wash over him, revealing the weathered lines of his face and the iron glint of a determined eye. The glint of the metal he held echoed all the wisdom and strength of a life devoted to protecting those in need, a contrast to the men who stood below, fueled by chaos and avarice. "You made a mistake coming here," he called out, voice steady when the world had gone chaotic. The intruders froze, the air thickening around them. Moments of silence dragged like a tall shadow. Then laughter erupted, more a desperate echo than a jolly sound. "What's this?" The old man's come to play savior. In that moment the world shifted again. The old man, undeterred, stepped closer to the edge of the porch. There was power in his stillness, a depth in those old eyes that belied the frailty of his frame. "I was in the army for 28 years. You think a few petty thieves scare me?" Their laughter faded. The old man's words were steeped in a commanding authority that rippled through the air, eliciting fear, the kind they thought they had come to plant in others. Yet here they were, cowering before the specter of genuine might they had underestimated. They glanced at each other, doubt creeping into their bravado as the wind whispered warnings. But the leader shook his head, steeling himself. "You're all alone out here, old man." His voice dripped with disdain, but behind that bravado, fear took root. The words came out like a whisper but carried the weight of 1,000 battles fought. The intruders had no answer. Instead, they hesitated, shifting nervously as they realized they had miscalculated their move. The old man seemed to grow taller, energy surging through him. What they assumed were years of weakness instead became years of wisdom, a strategic mind sharpened by experiences that built character like stone against the tide. Leave now and you'll walk unscathed. They exchange glances again, the primal urge to retreat battling with their pride. But aggression is a slippery slope, often blinding. They took that fateful step. With a speed that defied his age, the old man surged forward, cane a blur of motion. He swung, a downward arc that met flesh with authority. The blade of his cane, reinforced with steel, struck true. Yells pierced the night as the intruders scrambled. The element of surprise was on his side, the tides of fate turning as he danced across decades of training, twisting, pivoting, maneuvering through his own haunted memories. Each step forward was not just to defend, but a dance of retribution, an act of liberation. The leader fell back, scrambling to regain control, eyes now wide with panic. The rest scattered, terror thrumming in the air. The slashing shadows, once menacing, morphed into desperate figures, stripped of their bravado. Then came the sirens, suddenly alive in the distance, heralding the approach of guardians. And in their wake the wind carried the old man's unyielding resolve. "Run," he called out, his voice echoing through the ruins of their confidence. "You think you can take what is not yours." And with that they did what fear demanded. They turned tail and fled into the darkness, leaving behind nothing but whispers of doubt and terror. As the sirens blared closer, the old man stood on the edge of his porch, watching the horizon. The crisis subsided like smoke in the wind. A calm had returned, but only partially, lingering like an unshakable tension. He thought about the land beneath him, the old barn in the distance, stained with stories, laughter, and heartaches. A reminder that strength often comes in quiet forms. It's not always a raucous roar. Sometimes it's a firm, clear statement, just like he had made tonight. He turned, his silhouette framed against the moonlight, a lion who had roared in the face of ignorant wolves. The old man walked back into his home, shoulders squared with pride. And though the darkness shrouded the land, he held onto the light, the certainty that courage could scare off even the fiercest of men. And in that stillness he found peace. A thick fog rolled across the fields, swallowing the world in a blanket of gray, muffling the sound of distant crows calling out. In the heart of that fog stood an old farmhouse, weathered and weary yet stubbornly defiant against time. It was the kind of place where history lingered in every creak of the floorboards and every rustle of the wind. But tonight, the stillness would be shattered. 3 figures crept through the tall grass, their silhouettes merging with the shadows. They whispered among themselves as they approached the house, clearly emboldened by the darkness. "This place is a gold mine," the leader, a muscular man with a scar running down his cheek, said in a hushed voice. The eagerness in his tone was palpable, a hunger for quick cash. He had heard rumors about the old man who owned this land, a lonely figure, tucked away, as harmless as the sun setting over the cornfields. "We'll be in and out," said another, his voice trembling with a mix of nerves and excitement. "It's just an old man." But what they didn't know was that the man who owned this farm was no ordinary farmer. He was a retired army commander, a man who had faced challenges that would leave ordinary souls trembling. He had weathered storms both literal and figurative. And tonight, he would not go quietly into the fog. In the dim light, the old man stood near the farmhouse window, watching his fingers brushing the frame, feeling the history that soaked the wood. Years of sacrifice framed his leathery skin and deep-set eyes, eyes that had seen more than their fair share of trouble. There was no fear in those eyes, only a resolve cultivated over a lifetime. The intruders reached the porch, boots creaking on the rotten wood. "Doesn't look like anyone's home," one of them chuckled, but his voice was shaky. They thought they had it all figured out, these 3 men fueled by greed and bravado. They had picked the wrong farm, and soon they would pay the price. With a swift motion, the old man slipped into the shadows, quietly retrieving the cane that had been his companion for years. It was more than just a walking stick. It was a weapon finely honed through years of duty. He steadied himself, sensing the tension in the air as the invaders rummaged through his belongings. "Look at this junk," one of them grunted, tossing aside an ancient oil lamp. Nothing of value to a thief's eye, but to the old man those things were memories, a reminder of a life rich with stories and sacrifices. It was in that moment, buoyed by the audacity of the intruders, that the air flipped on its head. The old man's heart raced with anticipation, a pulse of adrenaline igniting his senses. He moved to the door, listening closely, catching snippets of their conversation. "I can't believe we're doing this," *1 murmured, standing awkwardly by the doorframe, peeking inside like a child at a candy store. "We're almost done," the leader replied with a sneer. "What's the worst that could happen?" As he joked, he failed to notice the figure lurking just behind the door, waiting like a coiled spring, ready to unleash fury. Suddenly, the old man swung the door open wide, the creak echoing through the night like an alarm bell. "You've made a grave mistake," he called out, voice firm and powerful, resonating with authority. The intruders spun around, dumbfounded. Here stood the frail figure they had underestimated, a man whose presence held the weight of steel and thunder. The old man's eyes shone with a fierce light, glinting like the polished handle of the cane he gripped tightly. The leader scoffed, masking fear with bravado, but the quiver in his voice gave him away. The old man took a step forward, cane clutched like a soldier's weapon, and with it came a wave of memories of battlefields, of comrades lost, of a code of honor etched into his soul. "You think I'm just an easy target?" His voice sliced through the tension. In that moment he transformed from an old man into a guardian of his land, a defender of the memories embedded within. One of the younger men blinked, uncertainty creeping in. "We should just go," he murmured. But the leader, caught between ego and fear, pushed back. "No way." With an unsettling calm, the old man took another step forward, his cane tapping rhythmically against the floorboards. The stillness wrapped around them like a shroud, every heartbeat held tightly in the air. The intruder let out a harsh laugh, trying to embolden his crew. His back was to the door, a blunder that made the old man's blood quicken. He had fought battles far scarier, but those battles had odds, a reason. This was not just about property, it was about dignity, about standing your ground. "You'll find out," the old man said, letting the silence stretch, each word a taut thread pulled tight. As the intruders hesitated, their minds wrangling with uncertainty, the old man sprang into action. With speed that defied his age, he swung his cane, the hook on the end catching the leader right on the thigh. The man cursed, falling to the ground, shock washing over his face. But the old man was already on him, moving like a storm. They thought they could dominate a lonely old man, but he was not just a farmer. He had been trained to survive. The second intruder charged, but the old man sidestepped, using the force of the assailant's own weight against him. He pivoted, sending the man crashing against the dusty wall, the air leaving his lungs with a whoosh. It happened so fast that one moment of bravado turned into sheer panic. The last of the trio stood frozen, eyes wide, taking in the scene unfolding before him. Something primal stirred within him, the instinct to flee, but his legs were rooted in fear. He wailed, the reality of their folly hitting like a hammer. "You're right, and it's too late," the old man replied, voice steady and unfaltering. Each calculated move was not just a response of reflex, but a surge of spirit, a reclaiming of his territory. When he turned, cane striking the wood with deliberate precision, the leader shouted, trying to rise, to regain control over this spiraling chaos. "It's just an old man. Get up." But those words felt hollow. The old man's resolve towered over them like an unyielding fortress, a testament to his years of training and inner strength. He was a whirlwind, a seasoned warrior shifted into a quiet life but summoned back to the battlefield. With one last show of desperation, the leader lunged again, but this time the old man was ready. He sidestepped, letting his cane swing low, tripping the man just enough to send him sprawling to the ground, face first. It was as if time slowed, every moment skewed in the dawning horror upon the trespasser's eyes. The old man breathed, standing quietly over the man who now lay on the dirty floor, humiliated and vulnerable. In that moment the shift was complete, the air thick with the realization of their failure. One man made for the door, stumbling backward, desperate to escape the shattered image of confidence. "Come on, forget it." But the old man knew they weren't done yet. He stepped to the door, his eyes fixed on the remaining outsider, who hesitated, torn between pride and panic. The intruder caught a glimpse of the truth behind those words in the old man's eyes, a history that ran deeper and stronger than any threat he could impose. Finally, he fled, following his companions into the night, their terrified retreat echoed in their hurried footsteps. The old man exhaled slowly, the adrenaline simmering down as the world returned to its normal rhythm. Silence fell, thick and heavy, enveloping him like an old blanket. He leaned against the doorframe, a weary warrior who had fought a battle that forged his legacy anew. He looked around his home, dust motes swirling in the dim light. Each piece of furniture held echoes of laughter, tears, and triumphs, and beneath it all was a sense of belonging, a sturdy foundation that could never be stolen away. As he closed the door against the night, sealing off the chaos, a sense of peace enveloped him. They had picked the wrong farm that night, and he had reclaimed more than just a piece of land. He had reaffirmed the strength within. And as he looked out over his fields once more, he knew the lessons had not been lost. No matter how the world changed, courage and integrity could still rise like a phoenix from the ashes of despair. The old man smiled faintly, a warrior once more, relishing the quiet strength that resides deep within. Tonight he had stood not just for himself, but for every person that had ever been underestimated, every soul who had fought their own battles, unseen and yet so powerful. He was ready to face another day, unyielding and proud. The sun had long dipped below the horizon, casting a deep blue shadow over the farmland. The occasional rustling of leaves filled the air, but a different sound began to creep in: footsteps, slow, deliberate, and laden with a sense of mischief. Three men had come together in the darkness, hungry for easy loot, thinking they were about to make a fortune off a dusty, abandoned farm. But what they didn't know was that they had chosen the wrong place to invade. The leader of the trio, a burly man with a chipped tooth and a swagger that spilled over with arrogance, pushed the others forward. "This is gonna be a breeze," he murmured, a smirk creeping onto his face. "Just an old man living out here." But behind the unassuming walls of that old farmhouse, hidden amidst the shadows, stood the man they would soon regret underestimating. Harold Thompson was not just any old farmer. He was a retired army commander, a man who had fought for his country and faced down enemies far more dangerous than petty thieves. It held memories of years gone by, of laughter, of family, and yes, of battles both physical and personal. But tonight, it stood as a guard against the foolish. Harold leaned against the window, peering out into the swirling darkness. The porch light flickered, illuminating the men for brief moments, revealing anxious faces masked by bravado. "I heard he's got money stored away somewhere," one of them whispered, eyes glinting with greed and hunger for quick cash. They moved closer, oblivious to the man watching them and the danger they were stepping into. Harold's heart pounded in his chest, not with fear, but with anticipation. He had been removed from the battlefield for years, yet something inside him had never dulled. At 65, he remained sharp, both in mind and spirit. Each day of quietly tending his farm concealed a lifetime of discipline, duty, and the relentless warrior mindset that had guided him through countless challenges. As they approached the door, he knew it was time to act. He moved silently, feeling the familiar grip of a heavy cane beneath his palm. It wasn't just an aid. It was a weapon forged through years of experience, with a sturdy metal tip that could strike hard if needed. "Let's give it a go," the leader said, pushing his shoulder against the door. It creaked open and they stumbled inside, eyes wide, searching for treasures. What they found instead was darkness, dusty furniture, and an echo of the past they couldn't comprehend. Harold waited, breath held, heart steady. His voice sliced through the silence like a blade, resonating with the authority of a commander calling his troops to attention. They spun around, caught off guard. The leader staggered back, face pale and suddenly unsure. He spat, trying to regain composure. "I'm the man who owns this farm," Harold replied, stepping from the shadows where he had been silently observing, an imposing figure beneath the dim light. The intruder's bravado faltered as they faced him, an old man whose quiet demeanor betrayed none of the storms that raged within. "You don't want to do this," the leader said, fear flickering in his eyes like the dying light above. The corners of Harold's mouth curled into a knowing smile. I had a feeling you'd say that, but let me tell you something. A wave of calm washed over him, a readiness that came from experience. With a sudden movement, the leader rushed at him, trying to catch him off guard. But in that split second, Harold pivoted, cane swinging with a practiced grace, striking the man's knee. The intruder collapsed, yelping in pain. The other two men had barely registered what had just happened. The room erupted into chaos. The second man lunged for Harold, but he saw it coming. He sidestepped, using the cane to block, and then pushed the man towards the wall. The sound of flesh meeting wood filled the air, followed by a stunned grunt. The third man, terrified, scrambled toward the door. He yelled, eyes wide with panic, but the old commander wasn't done yet. Harold called out, his voice steady, echoing confidence. With surprising agility, he lunged after the fleeing figure, rightly aware that cowardice flourishes in chaos. The man hit the porch, but Harold was right behind him. With a well-aimed strike, he swept the cane across his legs, and the intruder went tumbling down the stairs, landing in a heap on the ground. The sound of the impact echoed through the night, a testament to the old man's power and resolve. The leader, still on the floor, grabbed his arm, trying to comprehend what was happening. His bravado had faded, replaced by fear and desperation. "Stop! We didn't mean any harm," Harold replied incredulously. "By terrorizing an old man." The righteous anger in his tone cut through the air, ringing with truth. In that moment, Harold let the memories wash over him, years of service, of sacrifice, fighting for those oppressed and weak. This was more than just a fight in his living room. It was a battle against ignorance, a reclaiming of dignity that had built up over decades. Instinctively, he knew what he had to do. He needed to drive the lesson home, a reminder that courage comes in many forms, and sometimes it rises from the unexpected. As the leader scrambled to his feet, Harold stepped forward, cane in hand, a wall of iron determination. "You boys are lucky. I could call the police and end this right now. You'd end up with a record or worse." His voice softened just a hair, carrying the weight of his years. Trembling, the leader shook his head. The desperation in his voice shattered whatever facade he had left, revealing the scared young man beneath the bravado. "You came here looking for an easy way out," Harold continued, eyes locked onto his. "But life isn't like that. It never has been. You want to survive. You've got to earn it." The old commander lowered his cane, the fight leaving his body, replaced by something deeper, something rooted in empathy. He understood the struggles the young men faced. He had seen kinship turn to desperation in war and peace alike. "Leave this place and think hard about your path," he instructed, composed and authoritative. The leader, sensing the shift, took a cautious step back. You could see it in his eyes, a flicker of realization, a glimmer of hope, perhaps even respect. He turned to his companions, both of whom nodded, understanding this wasn't just about the money anymore. Harold watched as they backed away, moving slowly but deliberately, retreating back into the night. He held his ground, the weight of command still settling upon his shoulders like an old jacket he'd worn countless times before. "And remember this lesson," he called out as they vanished into the dark. As silence reclaimed the farm, Harold felt a deep exhale escape him. The adrenaline pulse faded, his breath steadying. A quietly earned victory washed over him, providing solace after a storm. Shadows had danced out there tonight, but the old man had held his ground. He was more than just an observer of time. He had reclaimed his legacy, standing tall against the threats that sought to rob him of his peace. Returning inside, he closed the door, locking away the chaos behind him. The old farmhouse, with its creaking wooden floors and fading photographs, felt warmer, safer. Each corner held stories that sang softly, celebrating his years, his bravery, a reminder that even in his solitude he had the heart of a warrior. Tomorrow would be a new day, one filled with the same quiet resolve he had lived by for decades. Harold looked out his window, the dawn beginning to break on the horizon, lighting up the fields with a soft golden hue. He had once again defended his home, and felt a renewed strength swelling in him. They had picked the wrong farm, but they had left with something invaluable, the knowledge that courage doesn't always come armed with weapons. Sometimes it can be found in the hearts of old men who stand tall against the dark. And on this farm, the spirit of resilience would live on, undaunted and forever vigilant. The moon hung high in the sky, casting an eerie glow over the cornfields, swaying softly in the night breeze. A group of 3 men crept across the overgrown grass, their hearts racing with a mix of excitement and fear. They had heard whispers in the local bars about the old man who lived on Thompson Farm, a place where riches were rumored to be buried beneath the surface, taunting the desperate and greedy. But they had no idea who they were up against. Just then, a lightning bolt split the dark sky, illuminating the outline of the farmhouse. The men glanced at each other, the tension palpable, electric in the air. The leader of the group, a tall man with a tough exterior and a chipped tooth, whispered, "This is going to be easy." Little did they know the old man wasn't just a mere farmer. Harold Thompson was a retired Army commander, a man molded by years of service and the weight of his past. He wasn't just living on that farm. He was guarding it, holding onto memories filled with honor, sacrifice, and resilience. As the intruders inched closer to the porch, Harold stood in the shadows, waiting. His heart, steady and calm, pounded in his chest, not with the fear of being caught but with the thrill of what was to come. He had spent decades on battlefields, faced adversaries who sought to destroy everything he held dear. Tonight he wouldn't let bandits invade his sanctuary. The men reached the porch and exchanged wary glances, excitement crackling between them. "Let's get in there and be quick," the leader said. He kicked the door and it creaked open, revealing a dim entryway. They stepped inside, the air thick with dust and age, a world trapped in time. Harold felt a surge of determination. His voice boomed through the silence, carrying the weight of authority and years lost to service. The intruders froze, their bravado evaporating like mist. They turned around slowly, eyes wide with disbelief. "What the hell?" asked the leader, his confidence waning. "I'm the man who owns this farm," Harold replied, inching closer from the shadows. The intruders half laughed, half gasped at the sight of the elderly man standing before them, cane in hand, yet emanating an aura of strength that sent chills down their spines. The leader regained some confidence, masking his fear beneath a facade of bravado. "Borrow some things." Harold shifted, the light catching the glint in his eyes. "You think you can just take what isn't yours?" With practiced ease, he brandished his cane, gripping it firmly like a sword. Years of military training flooded his mind. Muscle memory took over as he assessed the 3 men. They were young, built for haste, but unprepared for a fight they hadn't expected. One of the other intruders glanced at the leader, uncertainty reflected in his eyes. But the leader's pride held him back. "No way," he shouted, launching forward, rushing at Harold like a bull without a plan. Time slowed as Harold sidestepped, cane swinging high, connecting sharply with the man's shoulder. The intruder stumbled, gasping in surprise, and before the others could react, Harold launched himself into the fray. He moved with the agility of an experienced soldier, leveraging his cane to trip another attacker, sending him sprawling across the wooden floor. The last intruder panicked, barely had time to react as Harold spun around, the weight of his years focusing all his energy into one decisive swing that sent the young man reeling back. In a matter of seconds, the chaos erupted, the noise filling the old farmhouse, a cacophony of grunts, shouts, and the sound of bodies colliding with the ground. The 3 men had thought they were invincible, but this was no ordinary confrontation. They were facing a seasoned warrior who had fought for his life before, a man who wouldn't back down even at his age. As they struggled to regain control, the leader scrambled back onto his feet, adrenaline coursing through his veins. He yelled, trying to rally his friends. Harold echoed, his calm demeanor infuriating them even more. "You think you can take anything from me? I fought for what I have." It was a battle neither of them expected. Each time the intruders charged, Harold countered, his cane becoming an extension of his will-deflecting attacks, striking back with precision. Each blow he delivered echoed with years of discipline, courage, and a fierce desire to protect his home. The leader was losing steam, sweat drenching his brow as he backed against the wall, fear eroding his bravado. "You're just an old man." Harold, drenched in adrenaline and conviction, chuckled softly. In that moment the last of the trio made a break for the door, fear coursing through him. The old man's instinct kicked in. He wouldn't let them flee unscathed. Stepping forward, he blocked the exit, cane poised for defense. "You think running away will save you. You need to understand that actions have consequences," he said, voice steady, powerful. The intruder faltered, eyes darting, but he couldn't find an escape. Harold stepped closer, the shadows shifting around him, becoming more than just the old man. He was the embodiment of every battle he had fought, every sacrifice he had made for this very moment. "I didn't want to hurt you," he continued, his voice calm yet firm. With a swift move, Harold pushed the intruder back, sending him crashing to the ground. Disarmed and vulnerable, the gang members lay scattered, stripped of their earlier confidence, feelings of panic now consuming them. The energy had shifted, fear had replaced excitement. In a last desperate attempt, the leader charged again, eyes wild. But Harold was ready, anticipating every move. He sidestepped, swinging his cane in a wide arc, sweeping the man off his feet violently, sending him sprawling into a pile of forgotten tools and rusted machinery. The wind knocked from his lungs. Breathless and shaken, the chaos finally came to a standstill. Harold stood tall, surveying the remnants of the confrontation, and the three men gasped for breath on the ground, realizing they had underestimated the old man, not just as a farmer, but as a protector of his land. "Get out of my house," Harold commanded, placing the cane down gently but still formidable. The trio exchanged uncertain glances, caught in defeat, then scrambled to their feet and dashed toward the door. They stumbled out into the cool night air, hearts racing, anger and humiliation burning in their chests as they disappeared into the darkness. As silence settled back over the farmhouse, Harold took a moment to gather himself. The adrenaline began to recede, leaving him with a sense of accomplishment mixed with exhaustion. He leaned against the wall, letting the reality wash over him. The battles were not just fought in fields, they could be fought in homes, too. He moved slowly around the house, checking for any damages. Each creak beneath his feet reminded him of the memories this house held, the laughter of children, the love of his wife, the camaraderie of fellow soldiers who had gathered to share stories after long deployments. This place was sacred, a haven he had built and defended fiercely. Sitting down at the kitchen table, he gazed out the window at the fields that stretched before him, illuminated by the soft light of the moon. The silence was comforting, but beneath it, he felt the heavy weight of what had just occurred. The confrontation had reminded him of the battles he had faced in the military, the choices he had made. It was true that physical combat could be won and lost, but the fight for your home, your peace, and your identity, that was essential. Times had changed, but the spirit of a warrior lived within him, unyielding against threats from anyone willing to disturb his sanctuary. As he sipped a cup of warm tea, he couldn't help but reflect. Life had its way of throwing curveballs, sometimes in the form of desperate intruders in the night. But Harold had learned that standing tall, rooted in his principles and dignity, would always serve him well. He honored the lessons from his past, knowing he had once again defended more than just a piece of land. He had stood for values that mattered: integrity, grit, and the stubborn courage to protect what you love. The quiet hum of the night wrapped around him like a familiar embrace, and with a soft sigh, he returned to reality, knowing tomorrow would come with its own challenges. The sun would rise again over Thompson Farm, and with it, new opportunities to care for the land he cherished, a simple, revered life where courage, safety, and peace reigned. In that moment, Harold Thompson felt an immense pride swell within him. He had fought battles, and even in the stillness of the night, he had proven beyond a shadow of a doubt. They had chosen the wrong farm. There was a kind of strength that came with age, one that wasn't measured by the quickness of youth but by the unwavering fire in the spirit. And that fire would never dim. The moon hung low, casting eerie shadows over Thompson Farm. It was quiet, too quiet. The only sounds were the soft whispers of the wind brushing through the cornfields, but beneath that calm exterior lay a boiling tension. A trio of young men, fueled by bravado and desperation, crept toward the old farmhouse. They believed they were about to strike gold. The rumors had spread through town like wildfire. The old man living alone on the farm had money and valuables stashed away, just waiting to be taken. They approached the porch, their silhouettes shrouded in darkness. The leader, a cocky figure with a chipped tooth and an overconfidence born from ignorance, pushed open the creaky door. "This is gonna be easy," he whispered, grinning at his companions. What they didn't know was that the old man wasn't just any ordinary farmer. Harold Thompson had spent decades in the military, living and breathing the life of a soldier. He was a retired army commander, and the years spent fighting for his country had forged a man who wasn't easily intimidated. As the intruders stepped inside, Harold stood silently in the shadows, observing. His heart thudded steadily, not from fear, but from determination. He was ready for whatever came next. With the dim light flickering overhead, the three men began to scavenge through the old farmhouse. They kicked aside dust-covered furniture and rifled through cabinets, the excitement of theft thrumming in their veins. But as they rummaged, Harold made his presence known. He called out, his voice steady, like thunder rumbling in the distance. They spun around, eyes wide as they registered the elderly man standing before them, cane in hand, a fierce glint in his eye. Suddenly they felt the weight of their assumptions crash down upon them. They thought they could dominate this old man, but what they saw was far from frail. The leader spat, bravado seeping away as fear crept in. "I'm the man who owns this farm," Harold replied, his tone unwavering. The leader hesitated, the flicker of doubt igniting in his eyes. "We don't want any trouble." But his voice wavered, betraying the unsteady ground on which he stood. "No one takes anything from here without facing the consequences," Harold countered, stepping forward, his cane gripped tightly, poised for action. With a sudden burst of adrenaline, the leader charged, trying to catch the old man off guard. But Harold anticipated the move, sidestepping gracefully and swinging his cane like a seasoned warrior. The tip made contact with the attacker's knee, sending him crumpling to the floor, a surprised scream escaping his lips. The other two intruders froze, eyes wide. This was no ordinary old man. He carried an ancient wisdom, a strength unbeknownst to them. One of them whispered, rooted in place. Fear replaced their confidence as they realized they had seriously miscalculated. Harold approached the remaining two, his presence growing stronger with each step. He spoke with a calm ferocity, eyes locked onto their movements. Panicked, one of the younger men rushed at him, but Harold moved with swiftness and grace, flipping his cane expertly to block the attack. He pivoted on his heel, using the man's momentum against him. In a fluid motion, he sent the intruder tumbling to the ground, gasping for breath. The last man, deciding that discretion was the better part of valor, fumbled toward the door. "We've got to get out of here," he shouted, desperation gripping his voice. But Harold was no longer a simple farmer. He was the embodiment of resilience, and he wouldn't allow them to escape so easily. With a swift move, he turned, blocking the exit as the intruder scrambled back, attention locked on him with a mix of fear and disbelief. Harold challenged, his voice steady yet firm. The terrified man hesitated, shadows dancing across his face. The confidence of the leader was gone, replaced by the stark reality of standing against a man who had served his country, a man who had once faced real battles, both in war and peace. As the leader struggled to get back on his feet, he glanced at his friends, uncertainty clouding his expression. Perhaps they should have thought twice before attempting to rob an old farmer. Perhaps they were in deeper than they had realized. With a final push, the leader lunged again, filled with desperation. But Harold anticipated the move, his instincts honed from years of experience. He sidestepped smoothly, swinging his cane once more, striking the leader hard across the legs. The intruder fell again, hitting the ground with a hard thud, breath knocked out of him. Harold's voice reverberated throughout the dim foyer. The urgency to dominate faded. The three men lay scattered, defeated by a man they had assumed was weak. Breathless, the leader struggled to stand again. He gasped, fear pooling in his eyes. "There's nothing to talk about," Harold replied, resolute. Harold advanced, channeling all the strength he had gained from his years of service, the weight of his life experiences flowing through him. To the intruders, he must have seemed like a lion, ferocious and unyielding. With a last desperate effort, the remaining intruder broke and dashed for the door, the fear finally overwhelming him. Harold wasn't done yet. He blocked the pathway with a firm stance as the intruder tried to push his way past. As they stood at the threshold, Harold's voice broke through the tension once more, steady and unwavering. "Remember this moment. They finally understood the gravity of their choices, young, impulsive, and now humiliated. The fear of the unknown eclipsed their previous bravado. They stumbled out of the farmhouse into the cool night air, hearts racing as they fled into the shadows. As silence enveloped the farm, Harold leaned against a dusty wall, catching his breath, the adrenaline ebbing away. The calm of the night settled around him, and he felt a sense of satisfaction wash over him. He may have aged, but he had proven that his spirit remained unbroken. Behind him, the farmhouse echoed with memories of laughter, love, and yes, of battles fought on distant shores. Every scratch on the wooden floor told a story. He was more than just a caretaker. He was a guardian, a testament to resilience. As he surveyed his home, he felt a blend of emotions. The confrontation had stirred not just a defensive instinct, but a deep well of pride he thought might have been dormant. At 65, he had not only defended his territory but reaffirmed his identity and the principles he held dear. Sitting down at the kitchen table, he looked out over the field stretching before him, illuminated in the silver light of the fading moon. The quiet hummed softly, whispering lessons learned in resilience. He thought back to his days in the army, where camaraderie forged bonds that lasted lifetimes. There was honor among soldiers. They understood the cost of freedom, the pain of sacrifice. The bravery shown that night reminded him of the many times he had stood beside brothers in arms, fighting for what was right. But tonight had been different. This was a war fought on familiar grounds, against intruders who had no idea of the legacy that resided within these walls. The old man allowed himself a rare smile, a glimmer of satisfaction returning to his face. He pondered the young men who had sought to steal from him. They had picked the wrong farm, not realizing the strength of the spirit they would encounter. Finally, as the first hints of sunrise painted the horizon with strokes of gold, Harold felt a renewed purpose. There would be new challenges in the days ahead, but on that night he affirmed a truth deep in his soul. He was not merely a relic of the past. He was alive in every sense of the word. With a heart full of gratitude and a resolve reborn, he stood and moved to the window, watching as the sun broke free from the horizon. Each ray that shined down felt like a promise that life, with all its unpredictability, would always offer the chance to fight, to stand tall, and to protect what was rightfully yours. They had come to take from him, but they had left with nothing but lessons learned and a deep-seated fear of the old man they had chosen to confront. In that moment, Harold Thompson owned not just the land, but the very essence of resilience etched into his soul, a warrior ready to face whatever life had in store, unyielding and proud. The night was heavy with tension, the kind that clung to the air like thick fog. It was the perfect cover for three figures making their way through the tall grass toward Thompson Farm. The moonlight barely broke through the clouds, casting just enough illumination to reveal their eager faces. They weren't just looking for any target, they were hunting for a treasure. A rumor of riches hidden in the old farmhouse whispers had fueled their audacity. "We're gonna make a killing," the leader boasted, a man whose confidence was painted over raw, desperate fear. He was stocky, with a chipped tooth that added a certain roughness to his smirk. His name was Jake, and he had convinced his friends that this old man, alone and frail, would be an easy mark. As they tiptoed toward the porch, they felt invincible. With every creak of the old wood, Jake nudged the others forward. "It's just an old man. What's he gonna do?" His bravado echoed in the darkness, but with every word, a sense of dread began to seep in. What they didn't know was that standing in the shadows of his own home was Harold Thompson, a man shaped not by the quiet life of farming but by the furious battles of his past. He had served as an army commander for over 20 years, faced enemies far more dangerous than these foolish men. And tonight, he was prepared. As they neared the door, Harold's heartbeat quickened, not with fear but with a familiar anticipation. He had seen his share of conflict, but now, at 65, his only battles were fought in his mind, until now. The door swung open with a groan, revealing the darkened interior of his home. The intruders stepped inside and began shuffling through the shadows. Dust hung in the air, and the smell of old wood wrapped around them like a shroud. "Look at all this junk," one of them muttered, kicking aside a pile of forgotten tools. Their laughter echoed briefly young and reckless, until it was broken by Harold's voice. Their laughter faded as they turned, startled by the unexpected presence of the old man who stood firm, his cane grasped tightly in his hands. His eyes, sharp and alert, held a glimmer of power that belied his age. Jake stepped forward, trying to regain control of the situation. "Trouble?" Harold echoed, stepping into the dim light. Laughter faltered again, the men exchanging glances filled with uncertainty. Jake opened his mouth to retort, but it seemed the old man's presence was commanding more respect than they anticipated. "You must think I'm just some frail old guy," Harold said, his voice low and menacing. "But I assure you I'm not." The weight of those words hung heavy in the air, and for a brief moment the trio seemed to reconsider. But youth is often blinded by bravado, and fear sometimes feels like cowardice. Jake stepped closer, thrusting his chest out. But before he could continue, Harold lunged forward, cane swinging perfectly. It connected with Jake's knee with a shocking thud, sending him crashing to the ground, a howl escaping his lips. The other two froze, eyes wide in disbelief. One of them shrieked. Panic surged through the room as they began to realize the gravity of their mistake. Harold was not a simple farmer, he was a man of discipline and skill. "You boys should have left when you had the chance," Harold said, voice steady and unwavering. As the second man rushed at him, Harold anticipated the move, quickly sidestepping and pivoting. He struck again with the cane, this time sending the man sprawling against a wall, winded and shocked. The house trembled as if it echoed the chaos unraveling within. The last of the trio, barely able to comprehend what had just transpired, bolted for the door, adrenaline fueling his flight. But Harold, commanding in stature and spirit, blocked the exit. Harold called after him. The young man stumbled, eyes darting back and forth. Real fear settled in like a chilling wind, cutting through the bravado he had held tightly just moments before. He cried, voice trembling, "Survive!" The thought was almost laughable. Harold was tired of being underestimated. "You think this is survival?" His grip on the cane tightened, feeling the familiar pulse of adrenaline. The soldiers he had commanded would have acted with more honor. The confrontation had shifted drastically, morphing from a misguided robbery into a battle of wills. Each man momentarily paused, realizing the weight of their choices. The young men had thought they could win confrontations over youthful impulses. Harold knew that respect and honor had to be earned. "I didn't want to hurt you," he said, tone shifting slightly as he observed the fear etched across their faces. With one last desperate charge, Jake attempted to rise, but Harold was rendered fearsome in his defense. He swung the cane wide, knocking Jake back to the floor, the world spinning around him. The fight had left him. "You can't defeat me," Harold declared, raising his cane high in a show of authority. "Leave now and count yourself lucky." The intruders, now crumpled on the floor, exchanged fearful glances. The hardened exterior Jake had worn faded as reality settled in. With one last effort, they scrambled to their feet, the panic evident in their movements. "Let's go," one of them urged, taking a step back, ready to flee. As they rushed past Harold, he leaned on his cane, watching as they stumbled into the night, filled with realization that they had underestimated not just an old man, but a soldier who would never back down from a fight. Once outside, they ran into the darkness, fear taking the place of their earlier bravado. The night turned still, the chaotic echoes of struggle fading into quiet. Harold let out a ragged breath, the adrenaline slowly ebbing from his veins. He stood alone in the hushed room, surveying the aftermath, the furniture askew, the remnants of a struggle scattered across his space. The connection he felt to his past engulfed him. Memories of battlefields danced before him, reminding him that courage comes in various forms. He had once fought for his country, but now he was fighting for his home, a fight he would never shy away from. With a steady pulse, Harold placed his cane down and returned to the kitchen. The comforting aroma of coffee still lingered in the air, a reminder of the life he had built amidst the chaos. Each pot, each dish, held echoes of laughter and stories shared over the years. He was a man who had experienced loss and triumph, and now he smiled at the fleeting nature of that encounter. He felt a sense of calm wash over him. The courage shown tonight was not just about protecting his home. It was a reminder that he still held the strength of a warrior deep within his soul. As the dawn began to peek over the horizon, reveling the fields bathed in soft orange light, Harold felt a sense of victory swell within him. Tomorrow would come with its own challenges, but he was ready. The farm would remain his sanctuary, guarded fiercely and proudly. He would always stand against those who sought to take from him. In the stillness of early morning, with the world waking around him, he understood. Sometimes, the greatest battles come not from outward conflict, but from within, and they had picked the wrong farm that night. They would walk away carrying not just the weight of fear, but the profound understanding of respect. Harold had taught them that courage and spirit never fade away. They are eternal, woven into the very fabric of who we are, ready to fight whenever the shadows approach. The air was thick with tension as the gray clouds rolled in, obscuring the moon that hung in the night sky. A chill crept over Thompson Farm, wrapping the landscape in an unsettling calm. The old wooden farmhouse stood defiantly against the horizon, its paint peeling, telling tales of a past filled with hard work and sacrifice. To everyone else, it was just an abandoned property, but tonight, it had its secrets. 3 young men emerged from the shadows, venturing toward the farmhouse with a mix of bravado and an anticipation that pulsed like electricity. They had heard the rumors of hidden riches buried beneath the floorboards and a soft target in a lonely old man. "This is gonna be easy," the leader whispered as they reached the porch, a false bravado masking his underlying nerves. With each creak of the old planks beneath their feet, excitement bubbled in their chests. Inside, Harold Thompson stood silently in the shadows, watching. At 65, he was more than just a retired army commander. He was the embodiment of strength and wisdom, forged through years of service and heartache. His heart raced, not with fear, but with the excitement of knowing that danger was near, the kind of thrill he hadn't felt in years. He heard their muffled voices, the careless laughter mixing with the night air, and a flash of anger surged within him. He had fought in battles where the stakes were far higher than an old man's treasures. As the front door swung open with a groan, the intruders stepped inside, and Harold's eyes narrowed. They kicked dust into the air, not realizing they were trampling on years of memories. "Look at this junk," one of them scoffed, tossing aside an old lantern. They prowled about, oblivious to the danger lurking in the shadows. The leader called, his voice echoing in the empty room. "You got any cash lying around?" Harold stepped forward, emerging from the darkness like a specter. "You've made a grave mistake," he rumbled, his voice steady and commanding, filled with the weight of authority. The intruders froze, their laughter evaporating in an instant. The old man standing before them radiated a quiet power that belied his age. "What's this?" Jake asked, attempting to mask the tremor in his voice. Harold echoed, his brows knitting together in a mix of anger and disbelief. Before they could fully grasp what was happening, he advanced. With a swift movement of his cane, he swung low, striking Jake's knee. The young man collapsed to the floor, a sharp gasp escaping his lips. The crack of the cane reverberated through the room, shattering their sense of invincibility. The other 2 exchanged panicked looks, realization dawning that they were in over their heads. One of them gasped, backing away slowly, fear shining in his eyes. But adrenaline surged in Harold, and he continued, his voice growing stronger as he stepped into the light. "You think you can just barge into my home and take what's not yours?" As the second intruder lunged, Harold was ready. He sidestepped with remarkable agility, cane swinging once more to connect with the man's shoulder. He stumbled, crashing into a nearby table, the sound of shattering glass echoing through the tense atmosphere. The last man, now utterly terrified, took a step back, thinking only of escape. He shouted, eyes wide with fear. "You can't run," Harold warned, his heart racing with purpose. In a blur of motion, he closed the distance, blocking the exit with a solid, imposing presence. The intruder froze, all bravado stripped away, revealing the fear beneath. Harold asked, voice low and steady. The young man shook his head, panic taking hold. "Please." But it was too late. Harold stepped forward, cane raised, a warrior finally called to action after years of peace. He swung with precision, snapping the cane against the intruder's leg, sending him tumbling down the porch steps with a cry of anguish. Jake, now nursing his injured knee, tried to crawl away, his bravado shattered like the glass on the floor. "What are you?" he groaned, realizing too late that his plans had unraveled. "I've fought for my country, and now I'm fighting for my home," Harold replied, advancing on the remaining intruder who was still reeling from his fall. Just then the sounds of sirens pierced the night air, growing closer. Harold knew help was on the way, but there was still unfinished business. "You think you can just run?" With each word, Harold propelled himself forward, determined to make the intruder rethink every reckless decision he had made. In a final attempt, Jake brandished a small pocket knife he had hidden away. "Stay back," he shouted, but the tremor in his voice betrayed his fear. Harold held his ground, unwavering. "You think an old man would be afraid of a knife?" The weight of those words hung heavily in the air. In a sudden burst, the sirens blared louder, cutting through the tension. Shadows flickered as police cars pulled up to the property, blue and red lights casting a surreal glow over the scene. Just then, Harold swung his cane one last time, knocking the knife from Jake's hand. It clattered to the ground, and the young man reeled back, fear engulfing him completely. "You've brought the law to your doorstep," Harold said, his voice carrying weight. As the police officers stormed onto the porch, Harold turned to greet them, catching a glimpse of the three men scrambling to their feet, terror-stricken. An officer demanded, scanning the chaotic scene. Harold waved a hand. "They thought they could rob my home." The police rounded up the intruders, cuffing their hands behind their backs as they protested, fear written all over their faces. Asterisk, one of them shouted. The officer turned to Harold. Harold simply nodded, a small smile of satisfaction breaking through. "I can take care of myself, thank you." As the officers led the intruders away, Harold felt a rush of relief mixed with a sense of pride. He had defended his home, claimed victory in the face of adversity, and stood against those who had weighed their youth against his age. Just then, as the last of the intruders disappeared into the night, a sudden flicker caught his eye. Out in the fields, shadows began to stir. The sight sent a chill racing down his spine. Was it just the wind, or was something more sinister approaching? Instinct kicked in. Harold turned to the officer, his heart pounding once more. The officer's eyes narrowed as he scanned the darkness beyond the edges of the farm, the red and blue lights casting ominous shadows. The officer asked, hand drifting toward his holster, ready for anything. Then came the sound-heavy footsteps, the crunch of leaves underfoot. Harold's heart sank as he realized this wasn't over. He glanced back at the direction of those shadows, a deep sense of foreboding settling in his gut. The looming threat sharpened in the air around them, and the officer turned his flashlight toward the field, illuminating what lay hidden beneath the cloak of darkness. As the light danced across the rows of corn, the figures emerged, shadows morphing into outlines of stern faces carrying flashlights and unmistakable intent. Harold's grip tightened on his cane. The looming truth hung heavy in the air. The night was dark, and danger lurked just beyond its edge. The old man had proven his tenacity, but now he needed to summon all the strength within him once more, prepared for a fight that could change everything.